My name is Emily Davis, and I'm 32. I've always believed that life rewards those who quietly carry their burdens, who patch things together when everyone else moves on. I work with my hands, fixing and creating, making the world a little steadier than it was before I touched it. My boyfriend, Evan, knows me better than anyone. He sees the balance between my patience and my quiet stubbornness. And then there's Lydia, Evan's ex-girlfriend, a shadow of comparison who shows up in subtle ways, texted invitations, nostalgic mentions, a reminder that past choices linger. I grew up in a small, slightly yellow house with a porch that creaked when the wind hit it just right, and a backyard swing that leaned dangerously to the left. My parents were practical people. My father, Tom, worked long hours in construction management, and my mother, Diane, taught fifth grade. Money was always a topic, even when unspoken. If my sister Grace wanted dance lessons, somehow the budget stretched. When I wanted a new pair of boots, I stacked shelves after school to pay for them myself. I learned early that usefulness mattered more than applause. I arrived home last Sunday after a 12-hour shift at the workshop. The porch light flickered like a heartbeat, and the air smelled faintly of wood polish and old grass. Mom had texted, "Family dinner tonight. Nothing heavy." That "nothing heavy" phrase in our house usually meant that a storm was about to arrive quietly. The dinner table looked unchanged. Meatloaf slightly overcooked, green beans limp, the same floral tablecloth my grandmother had passed down. Grace, always photogenic, always glowing, was animated about some marketing summit. Mom laughed at her every sentence, and Dad, as usual, kept glancing at his phone. My thumb hovered over my glass as I sipped water, watching, waiting for the moment the air would thicken. It came shortly after dinner when Dad called me into the den. The carpet smelled of dust and old wood polish, familiar and unchanging. He held a manila folder with a weight that seemed heavier than its paper. "Emily," he said softly, rehearsed, "I used your college fund to pay off Grace's mortgage. You'll thank me later." I stared at him, feeling the room hum with the fish tank filter, the clink of dishes from the kitchen, the quiet gravity of a family routine interrupted. My boots, scuffed and darkened by months of work, felt like anchors. I had my emergency cash envelope tucked in my toolbox, a habit I'd kept since I was 16, and I smiled. Oddly, I smiled. "If you think so," I said, voice even. His eyes blinked like he was expecting an eruption. There wasn't one. The folder opened, and I scanned the documents. Wire transfers, dates I recognized, my name printed as the beneficiary. Grace's lender highlighted in yellow. Mom peeked in. "Isn't it good news? We're keeping the house and the family." I nodded once. Okay. A simple acknowledgement, as if we had finished folding laundry, rather than reshaping the terms of my independence. And in that small nod, something inside me shifted, the quiet weight I carried finally cracking just enough to let the light in. This wasn't just money. This was a pattern. All my life, I had patched things for everyone else. I gave my sister my old Honda when she needed it. I helped with house renovations while she and her fiancé, Colin, contributed little more than opinions. Every patch, every fix, every effort went unnoticed. And here it was again, my college fund, a symbol of my labor, quietly redirected without a word, down. I thought back to these small, steady sacrifices, stacking shelves after school, repairing a leaky water heater at 2 a.m., hauling patio furniture, building a simple wedding arch for Grace's ceremony, while everyone else basked in applause. I was useful, I was steady, I was quiet, and I had never asked for recognition. Yet tonight, standing in that den, holding the folder, I felt something new. A line had been crossed. Not in anger, not yet, but in principle. I excused myself after a few minutes of polite conversation, stepping onto the porch. The night air smelled of damp grass and the faint smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. My phone and wallet were tucked into my jacket, and I made a mental note of everything. Dates, amounts, the casual way my parents treated what belonged to me. I called the bank, calm, methodical, citing my beneficiary status, insisting the transaction was unauthorized. The voice on the other end was patient, professional, procedural. "We will place a hold and escalate," she said. Returning inside, I helped Mom wrap leftovers, my movements automatic, my mind racing with quiet calculations. Dad poured whiskey, Grace took selfies. It was the same scene, the same family, yet the air had changed. Something fundamental had shifted. Later that night, Dad's phone rang. The words reversed hung in the air like a warning. Grace and Colin arrived in a flurry of headlights, confusion and disbelief written on their faces. I watched as the situation unraveled. Calls, questions, accusations, and then, finally, the truth settling like dust in a room that had been shaken too long. I didn't yell. I didn't explode. I simply held the folder, held my ground, and let the consequences unfold. That night, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. This wasn't just about money. It was about me, my choices, my boundaries, my voice. And for the first time, I understood that being useful to everyone else could no longer come at the cost of being invisible to myself. The line had been drawn, and I was ready to step back, to see who would respect it, and who would try to cross it again. The next morning, I woke to the sunlight slanting across my kitchen table, still smelling faintly of last night's coffee and metal polish from my workshop. My phone had buzzed, a reminder that the world never paused for fairness. 12 messages: Mom, Dad, Grace. All variations on the same theme. We're family, you'll understand. It's for the best. I poured myself a cup of coffee and didn't respond. I didn't need to. My mind replayed the folder in my hands. Bank statements, highlighted lines, dates. The words beneficiary and non-qualified use resonated like a drumbeat in my chest. My college fund wasn't a communal piggy bank. It was mine. And yet, for the third time in my life, someone had treated it as if my labor and foresight didn't matter. I thought about Evan. His texts were calm, grounding. Breathe. You're not wrong. I appreciated his steadiness, how he never overstepped, how he believed in me without needing to rescue me. He understood that some battles were mine to fight, but he would be there if I needed support. I called the bank, repeated the details, verified my status as the beneficiary, and requested the transfer be reversed. Their response was procedural, but firm. We will place a hold and escalate. I hung up and let the silence settle around me. It was a quiet victory, one no one at my family dinner would applaud, but it mattered more than applause ever could. As I sipped my coffee, my mind wandered through the years, the worn leather of my boots, from 2 decades of labor, the evenings spent patching leaky roofs, helping Grace with her projects, while her fiancé offered polite suggestions. I remembered the late nights at construction sites, the aching shoulders from hauling furniture, the scraped knuckles from welding and carpentry. I had always been reliable, steady, the quiet backbone, and yet that reliability had been taken for granted, stretched thin, and finally exploited. I thought of Grace, bright, careless, confident. She had always had a way of taking the spotlight, and my parents had always encouraged it. Now she had taken what was legally mine, and everyone expected me to smile about it. 2 hours later, I received a text from Grace. Thanks for saving me. We'll put your name on the deed someday. I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen. Someday wasn't a solution. It was a postponement, a deflection. The idea that my consent was optional, that my rights were negotiable, gnawed at me more than anger ever could. I put the phone down and began preparing my tools. Routine, precision, repetition. This was how I processed stress, through movement and focus. I disassembled a welding jig, rethreaded metal rods, and let my thoughts wander freely. Each motion reminded me of the rhythm of my life, a life of patching, repairing, fixing, and quietly enduring. But now the rhythm had changed. Later that day, Dad stopped by my apartment. I opened the door cautiously, boots scuffed, hands streaked with dust. He filled the doorway with his broad shoulders, eyes darting like he wasn't sure if I'd explode. It's the right thing, he said, almost casually. Grace is building a home. You can do your schooling on your own. You always do. How much? I asked, voice steady. Only $3,800, he said, shrugging as if it were a minor inconvenience. I laughed. It surprised both of us, the absurdity of it. He bristled, muttered something about tone. I didn't care. No, I said. Mom tried the gentle approach later. If you love your sister, you'll support her, she said. We all sacrificed. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Love wasn't a blank check for my labor and my funds. Sacrifice wasn't permission to ignore my rights. The week went on, filled with small, testing moments, texts reminding me of family duty, casual comments about generosity, the subtle expectation that I would give in. But I didn't. I stayed calm, precise, measured. I wasn't angry. I was determined. Every decision was deliberate, every refusal rooted in self-respect and principle. By Thursday, the tension was palpable. Grace's voice on the phone carried a mix of incredulity and guilt. "Are you really going through with this?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm going through with respecting my boundaries." The words felt heavy but right, like placing a beam securely after years of improvisation. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about who I was and what I would allow in my life. That night, Evan stopped by, sensing the undercurrent of tension in my apartment. He didn't ask for details. He didn't offer to fight for me. He simply sat beside me, hand on mine, steadying. "Whatever you need," he said softly. And for the first time in years, I felt that quiet relief, the kind that comes not from victory over others, but from aligning action with conscience. The first small victories were invisible to the world, but to me, they were monumental. The fund was in my control again, the rightful guardian of my own future. And in that calm, methodical assertion, I began to understand something crucial. I could be strong without being angry, firm without being cruel, and respected without compromise. This was the start of a different rhythm, one where I decided what mattered and who would have access to it. And while my family might never fully understand it, I did. The following Sunday, my phone buzzed relentlessly. 12 missed calls, 15 messages, and an assortment of texts from Grace, Mom, and Dad, each more desperate than the last. "Please answer. Let's work this out." "You're hurting the family." "We'll make it right." I ignored them all. I didn't need chaos. I needed clarity. I sat at my kitchen table, the early sunlight glinting off my coffee cup, and reviewed the documents once more. Every wire transfer, every highlighted line, every signature confirmed what I already knew. My college fund belonged to me. I was the beneficiary, and no one had the right to divert it without my consent. The reality hit harder than I expected. This wasn't just money. It was respect, boundaries, years of overlooked labor and quiet sacrifice, repackaged as entitlement by everyone around me. I realized, almost painfully, that this fight wasn't about Grace, or even my parents. It was about me, what I would accept, and how far I would go to protect my autonomy. Then the headlights arrived. Grace and Colin pulled into my driveway, bright and urgent, their faces flushed with anger and disbelief. Colin went straight to my door, jaw tight, voice clipped. "You don't get to do this. The bank said you reversed it." I opened the door, hands steady on the frame, and let them see me fully, calm, unshaken, unwavering. "I did what I had to," I said. "The account is mine. The transfer was unauthorized. That's the law, and that's principle." Grace's face flickered between shock and fury. "You're punishing me," she accused, voice rising. "This was for the family, for the house." "I've been patching things for the family my whole life," I said, voice steady. "I've fixed, built, carried, and sacrificed. I've never asked for recognition, and I've never demanded repayment. But this is mine. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm protecting myself." Colin scoffed. "You're jealous, admit it." "Of what?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Adjustable rate debt?" Dad appeared behind them, towering, red-faced, trying to wield authority. "Emily," he barked, "you will authorize this transfer back. It's the right thing." "No," I said calmly. "It's the wrong thing. Respecting my boundaries is the right thing. You cannot convert my education funds into Grace's house fund because it suits you." Mom stepped forward, voice softer, attempting the familiar guilt tactic. "Honey, it's for the family. Grace will put your name on the deed. Everything will be fine." I shook my head. A deed isn't education. A promise isn't principle. This isn't about generosity or family. It's about autonomy. It's about boundaries. And I am closing the chapter where I'm everyone's emergency fund. Grace's eyes welled up with tears, her voice trembling. "So you'd rather see me struggle?" "Yes," I said carefully. "I'd rather see you live within what you can afford. If you can't, you adjust, like I always have. But I will not be complicit in erasing my own rights." The silence that followed was thick, the kind that hurts without shouting. Colin muttered something about lawsuits, but even he seemed to realize this wasn't a fight he could control. Dad's shoulders sagged, and Mom's hand twitched toward me, uncertain. Evan arrived just then, quiet as always, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder. No words, just steady presence. That gesture was enough, solid, unspoken support that reminded me I wasn't alone. I took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm that comes after decisive action. I wasn't angry. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was merely asserting my right to be seen, to have a say in what affected me directly. That night, I sat alone on my porch, the folder resting on my lap, lights from the street glinting softly on the pages. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wet grass and distant chimneys. For the first time, I felt light. Not victorious, not elated, but free. Free to draw my lines, free to protect my boundaries, free to live in a life where my contributions weren't taken for granted. The first ripple of change had begun. I didn't yet know what the long-term consequences would be with my family, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would no longer shrink to fit a story that wasn't mine. And as I closed the folder, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The world could wait. I had finally chosen me. Monday morning arrived, with the clarity of cold air slicing through the city streets. I made coffee, put on my boots, and sat at the kitchen table with the folder of bank statements and correspondence in front of me. The fund had been restored to my control, the hold official. Every wire, every form, every confirmation, mine. And yet, the most important shift wasn't financial, it was internal. I felt the weight of decades lift off my shoulders, and for the first time in years, I could breathe without compromise. Evan was the first to check in. He didn't ask for details or try to intervene. He simply brought a quiet steadiness to the chaos that had been my life for too long. "Coffee?" he texted. I smiled at the screen and replied, "Yes, please, and stay for a minute, just for me." When he arrived, he didn't lecture, didn't console. He sat beside me, hand brushing mine, a reminder that support didn't need drama, it needed presence. Over the next few days, the flood of messages continued. Mom pleaded. Grace alternated between guilt and veiled threats. Dad oscillated between frustration and disbelief. But I maintained my boundaries. I didn't argue. I documented everything. I responded only through counsel when necessary. And slowly, the tension began to dissipate. Not because my family relented, but because I refused to react. I started reclaiming my space, my time, my energy. The workshop became my sanctuary again. I built custom metal shelves for neighbors, designing each piece with precision and care. Each weld reminded me of the control I had regained, the autonomy that could not be taken from me. I returned to my night classes, diving into subjects I had put off for years. I enrolled in an underwater welding certification course, a dream I had always wanted, now fully funded by my own decision, my own money. The small victories continued to accumulate in quiet ways. One evening, a call from the credit union confirmed that any future distributions from my account required my explicit authorization. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly, and let the reality settle in. No one could touch my fund without my consent. It was more than financial security. It was personal sovereignty. Grace eventually texted again, a single line this time. I see now. I didn't respond. The acknowledgement wasn't necessary. The lesson had been delivered and received. Family would adapt, or it wouldn't. That was no longer my responsibility. I reflected on what had shifted in me. I had learned that being strong didn't mean being cruel. It didn't mean retaliating. It meant knowing your worth, asserting it, and refusing to let others define the terms of your life. My family had expected me to be pliable, the quiet fix-it, the one who carried burdens silently. But I had drawn a line, and for the first time, it was respected, legally, morally, and emotionally. Even Evan noticed the change. One evening, as we walked past the old house where I grew up, he didn't speak. We just walked side by side, the air crisp, the street quiet. The past was still there, layered with expectations and old grievances, but the weight had shifted. I was no longer a passive participant. I was active, deliberate, in control. The lawsuit threat from Colin and Grace fizzled quietly, a brief echo that no longer demanded attention. The credit union confirmed everything had been resolved, the hold lifted, the fund restored. I felt no gloating, only relief. And in that relief, a strange lightness took hold, a freedom I hadn't realized I craved. By the end of the week, I had established a new rhythm. Alarm at 5:30 a.m., coffee, workshop, walk, class, calls with Evan, occasional texts to trusted friends. I had protected my boundaries, reclaimed my funds, and begun building my life deliberately. Every movement was intentional, every choice mine. The past was acknowledged, but no longer controlling me. And somewhere in the quiet of my apartment, I realized this wasn't just about money, it was about self-respect, about claiming the right to live fully without compromise. I had finally drawn the line, and I knew, deep in my bones, I would never let anyone erase it again. Weeks passed, and the storm around the college fund gradually subsided. The constant barrage of messages, accusations, and emotional manipulation from my family had diminished to almost nothing. Grace stopped texting. Dad's calls became rare. Mom's attempts at persuasion dwindled into cautious check-ins. The silence was not empty. It was space. Space I needed to breathe, to think, to rebuild. Evan stayed by my side through it all, steady and quiet. He never tried to fix my family for me or tell me how to respond. Instead, he offered his support in subtle ways. A cup of coffee when I was buried in paperwork, a hand on my shoulder when frustration flared, his presence during the nights I felt doubt creeping back in. He reminded me, without words, that I didn't need to carry everyone else's burdens anymore. I used the restored funds to invest in myself for the first time. The underwater welding course was challenging, intense, and exactly what I needed. I learned not just technical skills, but also resilience, the kind that comes from stepping fully into your own life with no apologies. My workshop flourished, orders increased, and I felt a pride that was quieter than the applause I'd always given others for their achievements. This was mine, truly mine. One Sunday evening, I found myself back at my childhood home, not to engage, but to observe. The porch light hummed the same as it always had. The dented mailbox leaned slightly to one side. Life went on inside without me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I felt clarity. I could care for my family without letting them control me. I could love them without being owned by them. Grace appeared briefly, a soft nod of acknowledgement, and that was all. The tension had eased into a quiet understanding. My autonomy was not negotiable, my boundaries were firm, and life would continue on its own terms. Colin stayed away, distant, as if recognizing the limits he could not cross. Evan and I continued building our life together, carefully, deliberately. We planned evenings around shared meals and long walks, weekends for projects, time to nurture each other without the shadow of others' expectations. Trust, patience, and steady presence became our foundation, more powerful than any dramatic confrontation ever could be. I learned that family could hurt, yes, even deeply, but that didn't mean I had to be complicit in that hurt. Setting boundaries didn't mean closing my heart, it meant protecting it. And in doing so, I discovered a freedom I'd never known, a life built on respect, clarity, and choice. The final confirmation came quietly. The plan administrator sent an email. Future distributions required my authorization, no exceptions. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let myself smile. For the first time, I could see my life without compromise, full of possibility, grounded in the knowledge that I alone controlled the line between giving and being taken for granted. I am Emily Davis. I am 32. I work hard, I protect what is mine, and I choose the life I want, not the life others demand. I am not the family's emergency fund. I am not a pawn. I am not a silent witness to injustice. I am the architect of my own life, steady in my hands, deliberate in my steps, free in my choices. And for the first time, truly, I feel whole.